Well, thank you, Dr. Anahita Dua, for being my 85th guest on the WaveCapital's guest speaker series on relationship building in a team environment. Thank you so much for joining me today. You are a top vascular surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital, associate professor of surgery at Harvard Medical School. You have published over 250 peer-reviewed papers, as well as edited 5 vascular surgery medical textbooks. Thank you so much for being with me today. I look forward to having this conversation with you about relationship building in a team environment. When you think of relationship building in a team environment, Dr. Dua, what does it mean to you and what has it meant for your professional career?
Oh, thank you very much, first of all, for having me. And thank you for asking this question because the fact of the matter is that from the dawn of time, since the medical profession has been in play, relationship building and team building are literally the crux of success. And the reason for that is because you have two types of relationships that you have to ensure are perfect in order for you to get the best result for your patients. Number one is the relationship with the patient. And that is a relationship that is built in trust and understanding on both sides, where it's not really paternalistic, but there needs to be some area where the patient believes that what you're telling them is accurate and then will actually heed your advice. Simultaneously, especially in this day and age, we have huge teams where different people are kind of, focused and experts in one area, and coming together and giving all that expertise sounds really great. Like let's say, I see a lot of sports behind you. If you got a team where like one guy's a great kicker, one guy's a great runner, one guy's a great thrower, and they're all amazing in their own right, but they can't work together, they're going to lose every game, right? Because they're going to be infighting. And ultimately, the game in this analogy is the patient, in the sense that if you don't sit down and say, well, how do we all work together to make this work? The patient loses out. Nowadays, we have even more than just the medical team. You've also got the finance team. You've got the builders of the hospital. You've got all these other players that ultimately have to come together to optimize the patient experience, up to and including the person who brings the jello to the bedside for the patient to eat. And so relationship building and team building in our profession is truly the crux of what we do.
That's a beautiful description, and it's so true, and I'm so glad that you inculcated all the different elements and all the different pieces of how a top research medical institution like Massachusetts General Hospital and your vital role as a vascular surgeon, how you all play a role with respect to relationship building. And so when you think about your career and how you started, what led you down the path of pursuing a medical career? And what about vascular surgery,
Mm.
being that you're a vascular surgeon, what about that area of medicine attracted you the most?
So in terms of being a doctor, honestly, they say it's a calling and it is true. Of course, there's a lot of kind of negativity surrounding what's going on these days. But if you really go back to what the job is there's a person in front of you who's vulnerable and sick, and you take care of them. That's it. There are so many middlemen that are jumping in and kind of changing that paradigm. But at the end of the day, the doctor and patient are holding hands, trying to ensure that the patient has the best outcome. And that really attracted me because in order to be successful in that, it's not good enough to just be a good listener. It's not good enough to just be technically good. It's not good enough to be super smart. You kind of have to come together and say, I may not be the smartest person in the room. I may not have the best technical skill. I may not do this or may not do that, but I'm going to be able to optimize what I can do and get better and better and better to ensure that the patient has the best outcome. So it's a forever learning situation, and it allows you to really do something where someday, hopefully years and years from now, when I'm on my deathbed, I can look back and say, you know what? My life was worthwhile because I touched the earth and I spent time learning. It's not that I'm so great, it's that I have worked hard to be able to help others. And a life of service is really what I wanted to do, which is why medicine was so attractive. Many times there are other professions, of course, that do something similar. But in this particular regard, I felt I could give the most because I had an interest in the subject and I was able to, feel that empathy. In terms of why vascular surgery, oh my God. Vascular surgery is where it is at. So first of all, what's a vascular surgeon? People are like, oh, you do veins, or you do hearts. No, a vascular surgeon is a person who's basically your body's plumber. I take care of every single blood vessel in your body, from the base of your neck to the tips of your toes. The only two things that we don't do are the brain and the heart itself. And what does that mean? the beauty of vascular surgery is like we're like firefighters. You know, if there's a gunshot wound, for example, sadly, or if there's an issue where somebody's aorta, which is the big blood vessel, has burst, there's a time on that. There's a timestamp. You need to control the bleeding. You need to help that patient and you need to get them out of that situation. And then a lot of these patients are very, very sick. So you have to do all the medical stuff to get them back to functionality again. So it is this all encompassing job that's really difficult and really awesome. And that's why, the second that I did my first vascular surgery when I was in medical school, I was totally hooked.
That's so impressive, and that you have the innate ability to not only connect with your patients, and you mentioned about trust and having that special relationship with each of your patients, but the fact of the matter is vascular surgery, to your point, I love how you said plumber because you are really directing the body through your medical training and surgery. You're able to, take care of the patient and understand the inner workings of the human body. And as it pertains to obviously the veins, but it's more in depth than that. And you explained it so well. My sister is a two-time open heart surgery survivor. She had to get her aortic valve replaced back in 2020 and it was something that we always knew that was gonna come because her aortic valve, we were told when she was, a young child that because she had, you know, minor aortic stenosis, what it was called at the time, and so when she had her valve replaced, and it was a whole ordeal, it was right around, her pregnancy and, thankfully, she had a smooth delivery, but when she had that surgery, to your knowledge, as you know, typically when someone has an aortic valve replaced, the life expectancy of that valve is typically, I would imagine, 10 to 15 years. But what occurred just a few months back, she had to have another open heart surgery because there was bacteria that was attached to the mesh and the valve, and she had to be on very heavy antibiotics. And the reason why there was bacteria is that she got strep and for whatever reason, her doctors told her that it's a very rare case that strep could eventually get into the bloodstream and then have bacteria attach to the mesh, attach to the valve. And so, even with all the antibiotics, it still was not killing what was
Mm.
attached to the mesh and the valve. So, she had to get another valve replacement. And the surgery was a lot more challenging because they had to open up existing scar tissue from a few years before. So, in the sense of vascular surgery, although my sister's situation was heart related, how do vascular surgeons like yourself work with heart surgeons? And how does the expertise complement each other? And what expertise would you give to a patient, such as my sister, for example, in something so severe as that? And there's a lot of relationship building going on because as a vascular surgeon, you're working with other top specialists as well when it comes to patients' needs.
That's a great question. Actually, CT surgeons or cardiothoracic surgeons or heart surgeons are actually our brothers and sisters in the world of vascular surgery, them and cardiologists, these two groups. And the reason for that is because indeed, all of us are responsible for taking care of the circulatory system, which are the arteries and the veins. The valve that you're talking about in your sister, that's like the door to the main blood vessel that we operate on. And so that door needs to be sturdy, but it needs to also be able to open and shut properly. And so what was happening in this particular case with your sister, unfortunately, is the door was a bit tight and they had to replace it. And then, of course, as you mentioned, it got infected. But what happens in these situations is that the entire circulatory system in that area is impacted. So we come in and assist with the part of it that we deal with, which is again the big artery, the aorta. The heart surgeon deals with the heart structurally itself, which is the actual what we call the pericardium, which is the heart and the blood valves within the heart, of course. And then we take care of kind of the management of everything that happens, like the blood thinners that she would need to be on, and then of course call up the interventional radiologist if there's something unique that has to be done that involves kind of endovascular therapy, or we have our infectious disease colleagues, like you mentioned with your sister, who would indeed have to put a little line in her so that she could get antibiotics for a long time. And so we are together taking care of her. There's no point in a heart surgeon doing a beautiful surgery on her, but all the other stuff being crap. The anesthesiologist needs to be on point. The nurse in the room, who's the part of the scrub team, has to make sure that the right tools are on the table, sterilized appropriately, for the doctor to be able to use. And that's why there is no other profession I can think of, honestly, even beyond sports, that relies so heavily on teamwork as the medical profession. So we are very intimately involved with cardiothoracic surgery. And to this day, I mean, in fact, here at Mass General, we are actually starting something called the HVI, the Heart and Vascular Institute, that actually constitutes heart surgeons, vascular surgeons, and cardiologists. So can't be closer as a team.
Of course, and that really makes a lot of sense, and I love the fact that you bring sports into it, and first and foremost, thank goodness my sister beautifully had a smooth recovery, and, she's on a road to healing, and with all of your patients who have probably been in my sister's, situation or just your patients in general when it comes to vascular surgery, are there any patients whom you can think of or situations where it was tougher or that there were challenges and obstacles that you had to in, quick timing, quick speed had to figure out a solution, to save his or her life?
Oh my goodness, every day, unfortunately, every day. Vascular surgery has two components to it. There is the kind of traumatic side where, you're walking along in your day, you get hit by a car and you break your leg and it tears your blood vessel. And, we get called and a broken bone can wait, like it can sit. But a blood vessel, you have hours to fix it, or that person, even if you do fix it, will lose their leg. So there's that traumatic side. But the bread and butter of vascular surgery, I'm going to say about 70% of it, 75% of it, is actually chronic disease. It's people who, over the course of their lives, just through life, end up getting plaque, which is basically calcium, like hard glass, building up in their blood vessels that block flow to different parts of their body. Blocking flow to the heart attack. Blocking flow to the brain, stroke. Blocking flow to the legs, amputation. And so our job really is focused on stopping people from having these horrible outcomes that ultimately can ruin their lives. And so, unfortunately, because people are getting older, because things like diabetes is on the rise and chronic disease as a result, of course, is on the rise, we are seeing more and more of these vascular patients at younger ages, actually, with pretty significant disease. And we have to go and quickly do things in order to restore blood flow, for example, to the legs. I lead our limb salvage program here at Mass General, where we have to quickly figure out the best technique to get them that blood flow. But then a lot of times these people have also come with infected feet, like the same way your sister had an infected valve, an infected foot. And so even if the blood supply is perfect, if we can't get that infection under control, they end up with an amputation, which is horrible. 50% of people who are over the age of 65 who get an amputation, 50%, half of them, are dead within 1 year. So preventing that amputation is everything. And so there's an element of the timing again there, but it's not in the same sense as a traumatic injury. So we are truly, again, that's why the firefighter analogy works, because really it's that, you have a limited amount of time to preserve what is left over when a fire starts. And unfortunately, a lot of these patients, because of the way our medical system are coming in too late. And we're basically firefighting instead of preventing something. In fact, 85% of amputations in this country, 85, are fully preventable. But we just don't get our hands on these patients in time. And patients don't have access in time. And unfortunately, they get amputated.
And you do everything you can, as a surgeon and a part of a medical team, and then various other teams who are specialists within Massachusetts General Hospital, and you have the honor and privilege to work for two of the top medical research institutions in the world. I mean, Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital, because as I mentioned in my opening, you're associate professor of surgery at Harvard Medical School. And you have several distinctions, not only as a doctor, but you have several distinctions, other letters next to your name that I would love for you to go into more detail. But talk to me about these two particular institutions that you're a part of. Talk to me about this institute that you just mentioned previously. What are you prideful of this institution?
Mm.
What do you hope this institute accomplishes, for its patients? And then I'll ask my next question as it's
Mm.
sports related, since this is also a sports related podcast and the medical community is so involved in the sports community professionally, collegiately, and in all respects.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll tell you a very cute little anecdote after I tell you the answer to this question about sports that I think you might like because I'm seeing all that football behind you. So I'll see. I'll see whether you like it. But in terms of your question about working for these institutions, that's why I took this job. I'm double boarded in general surgery and vascular surgery. I did my general surgery training at the Medical College of Wisconsin. And then I went to Stanford for my vascular surgery training. And then I've been at Mass General and Harvard since. The reason I chose to come out here is because the research element, in my opinion, is such an important part of moving things forward. And you want to talk about teamwork. I mean, that's where it's at. I'm here studying this small thing, you're here studying this other thing, and together we find the cure for cancer. Actually, here at Mass General, one of the things I do, I have a research lab here on site that had NIH funding that focuses on personalizing blood thinners. So think of your sister, for example, right? You mentioned with the valve. After she would have had the valve in place, there's certain blood thinners that she would need to be on. And the reason for that is because you want those blood thinners to keep her blood just thin enough that she's not going to clot and she's not going to bleed. That sweet spot. Unfortunately, even with all the brains out there in the world, today, if you, your father, and your sister had a situation where you didn't have enough blood flow to the leg, and I did special surgeries on each of you that are specialized for each of you, you're a boy, she's a girl, you're different ages, you have different problems. I do a specialized, personalized surgery. After you guys are done, I would end up putting you all on the same blood thinner. One size fits all. The problem with that is, for you, it may work great. For your dad, it may be too much blood thinner and he may bleed in his brain. And for your sister, it may not be enough and she may get a clot. And so this is a major problem because 20%, so 1 in 5 people who have a surgery for their leg to get blood flow, fail that within 6 months because the blood thinner was not appropriate. So our lab is focused on personalizing your blood thinner. We call it the Goldilocks solution. Not too much, not too little, just right. And the only reason that I've been able to have success with that, and we've published extensively, we've got a couple NIH grants in the works right now, is because I have a hematologist working with me, who's top of the line. I have a statistician, top of the line, vascular medicine, top of the line. And these are all individuals that are like phenomenal in their own right. But I don't know what they know, and they don't know what I know. So together, being able to sit down and have a conversation and say, well, what about this? What about that? And figure out things that we can then put into action. And the beauty of Mass General and Harvard is you can become actionable right away. They respect research and they respect the pursuit of it. And so here, I have the opportunity to rub shoulders with people who think differently than me and then come together for a solution that our patients can benefit from. In fact, over the last 5 years, by doing this, we have dropped the rate of clotting from 20%, like I mentioned, so 1 in 5 people failing, all the way down to just 4%. And we're right now in the middle of doing what we call a randomized control trial, where we're testing to see, is this actually true? Ultimately, that would go into the guidelines. And when I'm dead and gone, hopefully patients around the world will continue to benefit from this group teamwork that has led to this result. And so working for these institutions really affords you that. It's not a guy sitting in an ivory tower smoking a pipe and playing with his bow tie. I mean, I don't think those days ever existed, but if they did, they're certainly gone. It's people coming here to work hard, to work in teams, to figure out these hard problems that are actually plaguing our society. And that's why I love working in this institution.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful that you take such great pride in where you work, and it's all about, again, it goes back to relationship building. I always say relationship building is the essence of humanity, and it's so true in your profession because relationships, if they didn't exist in a hospital, I don't know how a hospital could be successful. Same with a professional sports team, same with any other profession. You need relationships, and again, it's trust, it's competency, it's reliability. You have to be able to have a smooth and easy going temperament because the stressors of your profession, how do you deal with any potential anxiety or stress? I mean, you've done these surgeries time and time again throughout your extraordinary and illustrious career. So I'm sure there are ways for you to calm your, nervous system down, so to speak, because your patients rely on your, judicious mind and being able to make quick decisions and being able to think on your feet. And again, having a comforting way about explaining to your patients what type of surgeries are required or what your course of action is going to be to take care of them and be there for them and their families. So I'd love to also talk to you about your thought process in all of this.
Well, you're totally right about, like, the stressors. The stressors are it's a big deal. It's one thing to have your life in your hands. It's a different thing to have somebody else's life in their hands. I mean, you're sitting here talking about your sister, but your life was significantly affected by what happened to her and will always be. The ecosystem around a person who is in a vulnerable state like that, and medicine is that funny thing that does not care about race, money. You could be a billionaire. Health is coming for you, you know? And so it's one of those things that's the great equalizer, right? And it's my job to be your Sherpa through that process. And it's very important to have the soft skills to be able to discuss with the patient, make sure that they understand what's going on, make sure that their family is comfortable. I mean, so many people, especially older people, they may have horrible problems, but all they're completely worried about is how's my daughter going to feel? How's my wife going to feel? How's my husband going to feel? Then you have to be able to manage all of that and take that on and make it your own because, their success is your success. At the same time, that's not good enough to just hold somebody's hand. You also have to be absolutely competent. 1000% competent. I have no business touching a scalpel to your skin without being the best of the best of the best of the best of the best. Because, and that's not like, again, there's no innate talent to surgery. I'll say this out loud. There's no innate talent. It is an absolute hard work profession. You need to be a grinder, a hustler, a person who is ready to learn, like a speedboat, ready to be nimble. I'm doing something for the last 30 years this way, but guess what? There's a new technique and it's better. Well, I better get my butt in there and learn it because that's the better thing for the patient. That's the way medicine should always be with innovation and difference. And so the way that I approach it with my patients from a psychological standpoint is one foot in front of the other. They say that, like, being courageous doesn't mean that you have no fear. In fact, quite the opposite. Like, I am always anxious and fearful for every single one of my patients, but it does not make me paralyzed. It makes me better. If I'm going to do a big surgery on your sister tomorrow, I'm going to be spending the last, and I know it's scheduled, I'm going to be spending the last couple of weeks studying, reading, making sure that I'm the best of the best of the best. Even if I have done it 100 times before, there's always new stuff, there's always something better, and her situation is always going to be unique. And when I walk into that room, I'm prepared, like the military, right? Simulation has been taking place. And so I'm not walking in there for the first time. I'm walking in there for the 100th time because I played the scenario in my head. And that allows me to, again, put one foot in front of the other and make sure that you have the best outcome. And then I come and convey to you and your family, hey, this is what we did. This is why we did it. These are the possible risks. These are the possible benefits. So we're all on the same team and everyone's expectations are managed. So God forbid, if something does happen, which is unfortunate complications wise, we're ready for it. We're ready for the next level. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're flying the plane, as we're building it. And that is the way I think to manage any situation that causes stress. You got to practice and be as perfect as possible so that the outcome is the very, very best you can do. And that's the way that my head goes on the pillow at night. That even if there is a complication, which, slam wood, not even touch slam wood, I don't have many of, but even if there is, I know that it was the ultimate best that I could have given that patient. No corners were cut, and hopefully then the outcome is actually positive.
Sure. And has there ever been a time or have there been times where it's something that you wouldn't have expected or it's something new that you're facing for the first time? New in the sense of not having done just one surgery, you've done many, but in terms of a variation or something where, hey, I never experienced that before, but because of my medical knowledge, medical training, I've seen this in the academic sense or I've read about it. So therefore I have the skills now to apply in the real world sense on an actual patient who is under the knife and you're ready for it. When I think of my sister's first surgery, the surgeon here in Florida, who was recommended by my father-in-law, who is a medical doctor as well. He delivered over 15,000 babies in his career. He doesn't deliver babies anymore, but he's an OBGYN delivered babies in his earlier career, but now he has the non-delivering babies aspect of his job, but he's still a healthcare professional taking care of women daily. And he recommended the surgeon to our family, my side of the family, for my sister. And he had said to my father after the surgery had been completed, he said, "It was really a close call for your daughter," he said to my father, "because her valve was so calcified. It was calcified to the point," he said, "I don't know how she was able to be in a situation where she was walking daily leading up to the surgery." And we remembered that she would have shortness of breath. We would remember that she would get fatigued and just be overly tired and not having the same energy or fervor. So that was one scenario with the first surgery. And the second surgery, we had learned that she was septic for the first day. And thankfully, the sepsis didn't become a much bigger issue. And my wife, who's in medical device sales, I mean, she works in the operating room too. She works with, surgeons in women's healthcare. Well, I mean, her side of the family, they have diabetes, they have other ailments. But when it comes to just understanding sepsis, my wife's uncle, he actually got sepsis, but his persisted longer. And thankfully, his doctors were able to, take care of him and to solve the issue and then figure out a way to eradicate sepsis. My point is that we just learned from my sister's experience when it comes to sepsis, which you know very well, that if it's not taken care of within a certain amount of time, it could be fatal. So just I know we're talking about my sister's surgery in our interview, but for the sake of our conversation and the integrity of this discussion, it's a great example of what you and your fellow medical professionals deal with. You mentioned diabetes, or you mentioned, there's so many times that you're working with your counterparts who have to deal with aortic valve replacements, and would also love for you to talk about the actual surgeries pertaining to vascular that you deal with on a daily basis and you touched upon earlier. But just talking through this conversation, it's just amazing the challenges that my sister had and that people just go through on a daily basis. They could be perceived to be healthy, and all of a sudden symptoms, come out of nowhere, and it's really like a ticking time bomb. You have to get yourself to a hospital very quickly and then to be evaluated very quickly. So it is you hear horror stories about, hospitals not having enough beds or not having enough room to admit patients. And maybe you could talk about what you love about Massachusetts General Hospital too and Harvard Medical School. What do they do so differently that they pride themselves on, where they, as we all know from just years and throughout history of knowing how wonderful these institutions are, what you pride yourself on being a part of these institutions too?
I think the big thing is, the history. Mass General Hospital started as a county hospital, taking care of people in this area that needed the care. At the time, this is in 1811, at the time, there was no real concept of hospitals in the classic way that we think of it now. People who are rich would have doctors come to their home and take care of them. And so the masses did not have anywhere to go. And that's why you hear a lot historically about like, nuns or monks and like these sorts of groups that start to take care of the poor, and then it builds into a hospital. It's very, very common as a historical thing, certainly in the States. And so, Mass General started that way. And the reason that that's important is because it started with the concept that the patient is first. Everything revolves around the patient. The patient is the sun. And if you keep that phenomenon, and I'm not, I'm not a somebody that like, just has rosy colored glasses. I mean, I work in an academic institution, acutely aware of the fact that unfortunately in the United States, medicine is also a business. And so you kind of have a clash between these two things because is the money in the middle or is the patient in the middle? There's nothing wrong with money being in the middle if you're a business. But if you're going to put the patient in the middle, then you can optimize in some areas, but you have to let go in some other areas as well. Very similar to like a restaurant. If you want to have a high-end restaurant, there's going to be stuff that you might lose money on, but it's the right thing to do, right? And so all of us who work here, we come with that thing in our heart that the patient is number one, number one, number one. And the institution backs that philosophy. And that is the reason why things are successful. For example, you could make the argument that if you just eradicated research and you took all the doctors and you just make them slave away and you just bill, you would do financially better than what we currently do, where a doctor may do 50% of their time research, 50% of their time working. Mass General understands the utility and the point in the global sphere of ensuring that that doctor who does research continues to do research. And that's why it's such a great place to work. Now, there are always forces trying to change that phenomenon, and that's kind of the fight, that we have to make. On the other hand, from the business perspective, a conversation has to be had because, as a doctor, I want everything from my patient, everything, the best of the best of the best of the best. And if we're doing that, then for every one patient that's getting all these extra things, there may be 100 people that cannot get care because all the money was spent on this. So the business side of that is the right answer, of course, is somewhere in between. You have to optimize and give the best to your patients. But yes, sometimes there are long waiting times for the ER because we can't hire 20 more doctors, because even if we do, where are the patients going to go? There's not enough building space, and et cetera, et cetera. And so what I do like about Mass General, what I find special about this place is that it has maintained its historical understanding in terms of why it existed in the first place, which was, again, about the patient. And hopefully that continues. And certainly people that hired and work here feel that way as well. In terms of what you had asked earlier, like saying, facing a surgery or a situation that we've not faced before, that is actually the beauty of vascular surgery, that every situation is something we haven't faced before. What do I mean by that? Well, there are certain surgeries that are the same thing every time. Like, there's certain steps, and that's the way it is. Vascular surgery, trauma surgery, cardiothoracic surgery, they're unique in that a patient may have a blood clot, but it's different in a different location with a different outcome. And if the person themselves are sicker or healthier, they react differently. So me as the doctor, I have to change what I do quickly to fit that particular patient. If I do the same thing every time, it will be unsuccessful for the majority of the patients, actually. So really, it's very much like sports. Again, you learn the principles. If I'm a wide receiver, right? My drills, my life is all about running, catching. I learn certain particular principles. And then when I'm on the field, I'm ready for anything. It's the same concept. Like there is no way in a game that a wide receiver could have run every single play that the other side was going to have done. But because of their skill level, they're able to quickly do what they need to do to be successful. And that's the way that good surgeons work as well.
Yes, yes. And when does your institute open? What this institute that you had talked about at Mass General,
Yes.
and would love to hear more about that. How much funding is going into this institute, and what type of cases or what type of research do you hope that this institute, really focuses on? And obviously, it will make Massachusetts General Hospital even more distinguished with this institute being created. And you had mentioned about, a sports related anecdote that you had. I would definitely want to hear more about that. And being that you're in Boston, I'm sure you are a New England Patriots fan, I would imagine.
Well, I'm actually originally from Wisconsin, so it's Packers for me. Sorry. Yeah, the Green Bay Packers have been and I'll tell you what the connection is to that in a moment. But in terms of the institute, so interestingly, back to that concept about the patient being in the center, the world has definitely changed. Back in the day, there were just doctors. Everybody was a doctor. When I say back in the day, I'm talking like 2,000 years ago. There were just doctors. Then over time, the concept of surgeons came about. In the British system, for example, they used to call them surgeon barbers because quite literally the barbers were the ones that were doing the cutting. And that's why you had the barber pole has the red, blue, and white stripe. That's what that's from. They were surgeon barbers. And then, so then it was medicine and surgery. And now going to 2025, we have millions of disciplines. Interventional radiology, interventional cardiology, electrophysiology, like all these different disciplines. And so what has happened is everyone has become siloed and so good at their own thing, but human beings are not one thing. Your sister, again, to your point, you mentioned three completely different medical things: her shortness of breath, her infection, and her aortic stenosis. They're all interconnected. So again, even if one of these things is perfect, if the other two are not good, she as a human being does not get better. So what the institutes now are meant to do, so the HVI that I mentioned, the Heart and Vascular Institute, is exactly that. It's in the name. The heart and vascular system, the circulation system, is one big system that is cared for by a multidisciplinary team. And what we're trying to do now is say, instead of these siloed things where you as the patient have to go to this person and that person and coordinate your appointments and do all this stuff that might be unsuccessful, let us do the work for you. You come to our institute with whatever vascular problem you have, and we take the load off. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you come to see me and you have a horrible wound on your foot. I do a workup on you and I figure out, oh, you got a bad blood supply problem, but you also have an infection and you're not doing enough walking and you're smoking too much. That's not all going to be one doctor. So we have a coordination system that a nurse coordinator actually manages everything so that you, the patient, get the optimal care. So at the end of the day, you live a happier, healthier life. That's what the Institute's concept is. Right now, I'm the head of something called the Limb Evaluation and Amputation Prevention Program, the LEAP program, which already is a mini version of this. But now, as a big institute, we have our cardiology colleagues with us as well. Easy. Our infectious disease colleagues, easy. And so that's the whole idea. And again, back to that patient-centric model. So what had happened is the world had moved towards kind of a doctor-centric, hospital-centric model. This is the department of cardiology. We only do this. So if you come in with this infection on your valve, oh, I don't know what to do. That's inappropriate. Because how is your sister supposed to navigate that? She can't. It's our job. We already do this really well with cancer. Because in cancer, like if you get a cancer today, you are seen by multiple specialists. It's all coordinated because it's all timed. We're doing the same thing for the heart and vascular because the top 3 killers in this country are cancer, cardiovascular disease, and trauma. And so coordination of care for you as a patient is really key, and that's what this institute's all about.
That's incredible that, again, just how everything is so intertwined. And when you think about just, again, the various body parts and, we're made up of cells, millions and billions of cells. And so when it comes to cells, when it comes to vascular surgery, how much does that play a part in the cell makeup of our bodies? You think about cancer. So if there's bad cells and if there's a higher white blood cell count than a red blood cell count, that typically could mean, well, most likely it's infection. Most likely there is, an understanding that there could be cancer that has to be found out. So I was with my wife, and several years ago, we went to hear Dr. Deepak Chopra talk about how the cells that are in our body today, cells are generating all the time. So whom we are in the past, although we're inherently the same people, we're actually, in a sense, different people because cells, generate all the time, and we're a constant flow of cells throughout our life. So in a sense, we're not the same people. If you want to get really philosophical, your thoughts on that?
Well, the cells are created, but the blueprint for the cells is DNA. And indeed, your DNA stays your DNA, but that's how cancer actually happens. There are injuries to DNA, and then the cancer cells start to go wild, and that's how it happens. In vascular, actually, interestingly, there are certain disease processes. For example, atherosclerosis, which is basically just a fancy Latin way of saying your arteries are getting hard because there's plaque within them. That generation of plaque, of course, happens because sometimes there's injury to the blood vessels. For example, if you're a smoker, the inner lining of your blood vessel can get injured and get little cracks in it that can cause buildup of plaque. But there is a genetic component to it too. There are some people that smoke, as we know, nothing happens to them. And there are some people that smoke and, they get lung cancer, they get vascular disease and all kinds of things. And we don't know, what triggers what environmental factors or what innate factors trigger. So basically, in vascular surgery, there are indeed specific aspects that we are working on actually to identify. For example, in my own lab, we're actually taking plaque from patients that we're operating on, and we're analyzing the genetics to see, are there like certain genetics that are associated with having worse plaque. I have a couple of patients that are very young that have really not done anything in their life, no smoking, no unhealthy habits, just living their life. But for some reason, have a significant amount of plaque in their body. Something triggered it initially, and obviously they had a genetic propensity to it. But if you think of somebody that has a genetic propensity to being an alcoholic, but they never ever touch alcohol, they can never be an alcoholic. Wouldn't it be great if, maybe you had a genetic propensity to getting plaque in your arteries, but you never did whatever thing it was that may trigger it to start? It may be something innate, but it also may be something to eat or something, or you're smoking, like I mentioned, or diabetes. So that's what we're kind of working on, because prevention is everything in this disease process. We don't want to be firefighters. We want to be Smokey Bear. Prevent the fires so that people don't get sick and people don't lose their lives to really kind of terrible disease, because these chronic diseases are quite significant. To that end, innovation is a huge part. You mentioned your wife in medical devices. There's a group that I'm part of that actually has invented a special medical device that comes from the arm that can repair some of the big aneurysms that people get in their gut, because nowadays we no longer can safely go. In some situations you can, but we can no longer safely go in a lot of patients through the groin arteries because they're so full of plaque. So they're so rigid that the actual thing that we have to put inside you to fix the stent, to fix your aneurysm, literally won't go. So wouldn't it be nice if we could find another way that was smaller and faster? And indeed, that's what we're working on. And so, these situations kind of beget the understanding of the disease and then ultimately the innovation that can solve the problem. And again, working at this place allows for that, because it allows you the flexibility to say, I wonder if we could do insert whatever, and lets you go and figure out if you can.
Yeah, that's incredible. And thank you so much for explaining all that and referencing medical devices. And that really is interesting what you're talking about. My wife, the medical devices company she works for, it's a Silicon Valley based company. It's called Meditrina, and they're based in San Jose, and they have a unique system called the Avita system or the Aveda system, but it's typically called the Avita system. And it's using technology to remove fibroids for women. And obviously, there's a whole process of how to, when it comes to women's healthcare, right? Fibroids can be something where it can affect women's pregnancies. It could just affect women in that part of their body. So, fibroids, how they come up in the body or how they generate or become, known in, let's say, quantity or size, I'm sure there's a vascular component to fibroids. So, how familiar are you with fibroids when it comes to women's healthcare?
Oh, very familiar. I mean, luckily, I have not experienced it personally, but of course, it's a major issue. Not just from the pregnancy standpoint, of course, like getting pregnant, maintaining a pregnancy, but also just incredibly uncomfortable during periods, and because they can take up a lot of space. But in terms of what the connection is to the vascular side of things, is that these fibroids are very, very vascular. They have a lot of blood vessels that feed them, and so potentially, I don't know about this company specifically, but there are different ways to remove fibroids, including burning them and actually cutting off the blood supply so that the fibroid can then be removed. That's a very common way in which these are managed. And so, the entire uterine system, ovarian system actually is very vascular, has a lot of blood vessels. So they're intimately tied to us. In fact, vascular surgeons are called not infrequently when patients are going to deliver and there's a concern that they may bleed during the delivery, and we're kind of on standby to protect them if something like that were to happen. So quite familiar with that group, and that's pretty cool what she's doing. So tell her to keep it up.
Yes, thankfully. Yeah, she's doing phenomenal work. She's number one sales rep in her company last year and she's consistently always in the top 5. She's just very impressive. I'm very proud of her. She also, in a previous company, she was in pharmaceutical sales and she had won President's Club 1 year. So I'm very proud of her. But she's always telling me when it comes to, you know, different things that she's having to assist doctors with, whether it's myomectomies or when it comes to removing polyps and resecting and all of this terminology that I've learned over the course of
Uh-huh.
4 or 5 years now. It's pretty interesting. I'm very proud of her, and, she has a lot to talk about with her father since he's a medical doctor as well. Wanted to switch gears to sports because
Ah.
you had that anecdote or that story that you wanted to share with my audience and me, and love to hear that you're a Green Bay Packers fan. My wife's cousin and husband, they just flew up to Green Bay. They're gonna be spending a few days up there going to a game at Lambeau Field. So being that
Oh, wow.
Wisconsin, would love to hear about your thoughts about the Packers for this upcoming season. I'm sure you follow them, but being that you have been in Boston for many years, I'm sure you do from afar maybe watch the Patriots, but tell me about sports in your industry because, sports medicine and having top surgeons, taking care of these athletes and making sure they're properly conditioned and that they're ready, willing, and able to put their best foot forward. Not, to have a pun there, but like, foot on a field, but, being able to compete at the highest of levels. So how far has medicine advanced in sports, and where does vascular surgeons play a role in professional sports? Because you don't typically hear about the vascular side of things when it comes to athletes' injuries, but perhaps there is a lot to do with it, because if you really were to sit down and assess an athlete's injury, and if it has to do with something vascular related, I'm sure that, not to be contradictory, but I'm sure that there's a lot to do with it.
No, most certainly. Actually, I have quite a few patients that are from that world. What happens is, with every major joint, basically, there is going to be a blood vessel in that area. And one of the more common, for example, disease processes that we see is actually any sort of like overhead throwing, any throwing of a football or pitching is the kind of most common thing. Sometimes what can happen is because the muscles get so large, they actually push down on the blood vessels that go out from the chest into the arm. And when they do that, they can cause little blood clots to go down the hand. They can cause the arm to swell. They can cause, so we actually go in and remove the rib, the first rib, to give more space and decompress that area. Also, not infrequently at all, we're seeing traumatic injuries, especially with like knee dislocations, where like the blood vessel is actually right behind the kneecap. So when the knee dislocates and it pushes backward, it puts traction on the blood vessel, and it can either tear it, hurt it, cause it to clot, or make it bleed. And so we definitely see athletes that have, unfortunately, that sort of thing. In terms of sports, though, connected to vascular, I'll tell you what it really is. It's the soul that actually is the connection. The anecdote I was going to tell you is actually the reason that I think I am a good vascular surgeon today and able to work in teams is purely because of sports. So many, many years ago, I moved to Wisconsin when I was about 12, 13 years old. And at the time, I didn't know anything about sports here. Like, I didn't really know baseball, I didn't know football, nothing. And my teachers in middle school were trying to teach me, but I like couldn't get it. And so they thought that something was really wrong with me in terms of like knowing how to play sports. And so they wouldn't let me play. Then when I got to high school, I decided I'm going to go out for the first team that, comes out. And of course, it's fall, public high school, Brookfield Central High School in Wisconsin. And the flyer that comes out is for football, like, American football, not soccer. Everyone always asks me, it's American football. They didn't specify sex. This is back in like the 1990s, so not the world that we live in today. I would go out for the team. I was only 15 years old, so I didn't have a license. So I show up, my mom had dropped me off, and I couldn't leave. And I thought, well, all right, I'll just go out for the guys' team. And I did. And I ended up, there was a coach. His name was Rick Seinold, amazing man. And nobody really knew what to do. I mean, this is before the time of like girls and boys sports and stuff. And they were like, well, just if she does the work, she can play. So sure enough, I played. I was actually on the guys' team as a running back and defensive back. 46 was my number, which is why it was my lucky number. Played running back and defensive back, and we were actually an excellent team. I wasn't good. I was just great for scrimmage. And so sure enough, by the time I made JV, I was actually the captain of the JV team. And then when we were in seniors, we actually went to state, played in the state championship game. So I'm the only female to play in Badger Stadium in a state championship game, which unfortunately we lost. But the point is, the story is like, I really learned two big things from sports. One is you got to trust yourself and have that confidence. My teammates supported me. The world, it was different, like, of course, the newspapers were involved. There was actually a big Milwaukee Journal Sentinel article that came out titled Almost One of the Guys, which my mom has still framed in our home in Wisconsin. And, there was a lot of controversy in this and that, all the same nonsense. But, you block out the noise and you just work with the team. At the end of the day, it's you and your teammates on the field. And it's exactly the same thing in the operating room. It's just you and your teammates. Everybody else is the courage of the non-combatants. They're not involved. You're involved, and you guys have to get it over the finish line or get it through that goalpost or do whatever you need to do. And in the case of the patient, again, all the noise needs to be blocked out, and it's you and that team. And if you work as a solo operator, you're just not going to be able to pull it off. It has to be the team. Everybody has to know the play, everybody has to have done their job, and everybody has to do it coordinated at that time. And I really learned that. The other thing I learned was how much leadership matters. Rick Seinold, who's this coach I'm talking about, everybody looked at him. How are you going to behave when this girl is here on this team? And that guy, no special treatment, no nothing. He was like, just do the work, merit and work. And I did exactly that, like he told me to. Nothing special. Got my butt handed to me multiple times, showed up in the ER a few times, and it built me into the person I am today and allowed me to go on to be where I am today. So wherever he is, thank you so much. And, sports, again, such a major part of my life, specifically football. And if you want to see some pictures, I'll show you my picture taking a knee, all of us in high school with the football helmet and the whole thing. But that's definitely something that has shaped me. And I think a lot of people play sports and then go on to do surgery because that's what they learn. It's not a matter of being hardcore. It's none of that. It's just the discipline and understanding of how teams work to achieve success.
Absolutely. And because in your formative years, you experience relationship building at the highest level. And I say highest level because it doesn't necessarily mean at what age you're at or in what capacity, because that's a really phenomenal distinction. As the only woman on the team, and then the only woman, I believe you said, to compete in Badger Stadium.
Yeah. I mean, I got to do, my play was the 25 dive because I was a terrible catcher. So, 25 dive, just up the middle. And actually, interestingly, for our homecoming game, we were doing great. Like I said, we were a really good team. So we were up by 1 billion points. So the coach was like, go on, go on in. So I played and it was my first touchdown. So I got it and I got the game ball. I still have it in my home to this day, signed by everybody, so I mean, it was cool, back then. It was just, there was none of this noise that kind of surrounds the narrative today. Obviously there was no social media and stuff. The media was the media. And it really was just me and the team. And, maybe it's me, kind of yearning for the olden days and whatnot, but like, it was really just a great experience. And, I still know those teammates to this day. And in fact, after finishing the 4 years of playing football, it became a whole different world then. And I decided to, I matured a little bit and I decided to go out for the Miss India beauty pageants and actually was Miss Runner-up for Miss Madison for the Miss America ones and then Miss India, Wisconsin that year and then went on to do that. So like, but it all came from football because it gave me confidence to just say, like, I think I'm right about this. And the ability to block out noise, but at the same time, not listen. Like if someone's telling you something that's worthwhile and that you should integrate into making yourself better, you have to be able to catch that, but without worrying about what people think. Do you know what I mean? And that allows you to really achieve success.
Of course, I definitely know what that means. I mean, you were able to really assimilate, and whether or not people doubted you, you proved to everybody that although you're a woman, you're fully capable, fully competent, fully able, no special treatment, no special rules. Doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, you were able to achieve great success and make quality friendships along the way. And I love how you still hold your former coach in the highest regard, and that you still keep in touch with your teammates, and that your mom is so proud of you
Yeah.
as well. And that's an incredible story. And to have a sports background and a pageantry background, what was the pivotal moment in your younger days? You had mentioned when you completed your first vascular surgery in medical school, you were hooked. I think that was your word, you were hooked. But really leading up to those moments, what was the pivotal moment where you, again, took a liking to this profession? Was it one of your science-based classes? Was it a conversation you had with a friend or a mentor or a teacher? Was it something you read or something you heard, on TV? Or what really, had you say to yourself, this is something I really want to pursue. I really want to go down this path.
It's a great question. Interestingly, picking what you want to do in medicine or surgery is a lot like falling in love. I bet you if I asked you, if you and I met 10 years ago and I said, describe your ideal woman, and you would say all these characteristics, I bet if you now go look at your wife, not a lot of them match. It's just she was the one. And it's a lot like that. If you had asked me in medical school, what do you want to do? I'd have named off all of these demands I had about what I wanted in my medical profession. But actually, what it turns out to always be is who you feel the saddest for. What I mean by that is if I give you $100 and I say, listen, I got two charities over here. I've got a charity for sick puppies, or I have a charity for orphans in India. you are not wrong to give the money to either one, but you're going to go where your heart goes. And your heart goes by how you've developed as a human being. Similarly, when we are in medicine, in medical school, doing the surgeries and stuff, we have exposure to the patients. All surgery is cool. All medicine is cool. So ultimately, what makes you say, I'm going to do vascular surgery instead of doing plastics, instead of doing ortho, is because those patients make me sad. For me specifically, seeing an elderly person who's lived their life, who's paid their taxes, who's done their dues, come in with a horrible wound on their leg. People are being dismissive of them. They're not getting the care that they need. People are not operating on them because they're too high risk, because they're sick, and they're saying, just go home and die. I felt bad for those people. I said, I'll take that risk. I want to make you better so that in the last, 25 years of your life, 10 years of your life, 2 years of your life, you're not living on dialysis. You're not living with one leg. You're not jailed in your house because you can't function. I felt for those guys. My colleagues who have gone into pediatric surgery, they feel for the child that they saw on wards who had cancer, and the families and the parents. And my other colleagues who went into orthopedics, they feel for the sports guy who really wanted to play, who could have gone pro, but something happened, and now that poor person cannot make it. And that is how I actually got involved in vascular, because I actually wanted to do trauma surgery. I was always into trauma. In fact, you asked me about the other letters. I have an MBA, but I also have a master's in trauma sciences because I was always going to be a trauma surgeon. I love it. I love the quick pace of it. But, you know, trauma patients tend to be younger, they tend to be healthier. The surgeries are awesome, but, they get there. They get through if they, get to the hospital. But the poor vascular guys, they have the same problems, and a lot of them die. So I said, I'm gonna go this direction, and that's how I ended up becoming a vascular surgeon.
Yes, and that makes total sense because, whether it's a relationship with your spouse or friendships you have, or, obviously working with and interacting with your colleagues at the hospital, whomever you're associating yourself with in that given moment or whomever you're communicating with, I mean, to be able to have lasting friendships and relationships, and that's what relationship building is all about, there has to be synergies, there has to be commonalities, there has to be, an intrigue when you're talking to somebody that you feel like every time you talk to this person, it makes you feel better. It makes you feel more confident or it makes you feel more informed or, they have something to say. They have something unique to offer in a conversation or that they are positive, uplifting motivators. They are people who really value who you are and what your expertise is and your background. And, relationship building is all about diversity and it's all about people from all walks of life who are able to work on teams and accomplish goals together and really be purposeful and intentional with the goals that they're trying to set. And it's not supposed to be selfish, it's supposed to be selfless, that you do things intentionally in a selfless regard, and nothing is selfish about relationship building. And if people do relationship building where it's only for them, then that's not relationship building. That's a contradiction to what relationship building is. And I just love that we're having this conversation because it's true. Like when I met my wife, we were able to determine really quickly in our first few dates, because we talked a lot and we talk about our families, we talk about our interests, we talk about our hobbies, the commonalities, similar upbringings, and it really, when it comes to relationship building, you really notice a person's body language or you notice like their personality and characteristics, their character traits. And, but it's also that divine intervention, if you will, what's divine and why it's that person who you're going to be, God willing, you know, barring any unforeseen disease or trauma, God forbid, that you and your spouse will live happy, healthy lives and as long as possible. And we hear about, just a lot of death and disease and unfortunate tragedies. What happened in Minneapolis yesterday with the school shooting and how the doctor who was interviewed in Minneapolis, talking about which 2 children tragically were deceased, which children or adults on a no names basis, who was in what particular part of the hospital getting certain treatment. So we do live in this polarizing, divisive world, Dr. Dua. It's hard for medical doctors, medical professionals who are doing these surgeries. They're people too. There's a lot of human emotion. So although that you're focused on your craft and you're focusing on your your profession, or you're focusing on, what type of surgery you do when you're taking care of these children, taking care of these adults. How do you separate the human emotion from the work that you have to do, but at the same time still being a person too, still being a human too? And we hear about also with the Trump administration pulling funding from, these Ivy League research-based institutions, whether it's, Harvard or Columbia or others that have had to feel the effects of this administration's, attacks on more left-leaning institutions. But research-based funding, especially from the federal government, is so critical. It's so vital. So being that you are an associate professor of surgery at Harvard and being that you do work for Massachusetts General Hospital, I would love to just get your thoughts on some of the things I just talked about.
Well, I think you hit it on the head. When we were in medical school, we were told you got to be apolitical because you cannot bring your feelings. It's not just politics, anything, any feelings you have, whatever it may be, your religious sentiments, your political sentiments, your biases, they need to be left at the door when you're taking care of patients. You just come and take care of patients. That's it. It doesn't matter who you're treating. Your job is to just treat them, which is absolutely true. But that same phenomenon also means you have to be political because when you come to see me as a patient, you are always a patient, whether I meet you in the grocery store, whether I meet you on my operating room table, right? Any human being that is out there in my community is a potential patient. And therefore, my job as a doctor is to protect you and protect your health. And if there are policies that are infringing on your ability to live a happy, healthy life, it becomes my problem. It is my problem. So I cannot just say that I'm going to sit here and wait for when you actually have the cancer. My job is to go do the research so you never get it. Now, unfortunately, what has happened in this day and age, and by the way, it's not just the Trump administration. This is a problem with the government in general, that some of the policies that have been made are not working for the masses and are resulting in disease processes and problems that are now going to affect patients that we're seeing, but we're seeing too late. So doctors have changed their mindset where we have to get political. There is no point in your sister coming and getting a second surgery on her heart where a beautiful procedure was done and a valve was put in, but when she walks out the door, she can't get follow-up insurance. I very recently took care of a patient, which is absurd, who basically went through, and obviously for HIPAA, we cannot talk about who it is or whatever, but an ex-patient that had a procedure done where they had a transplant performed because it was an emergency situation, who cannot get any of the post-operative care because they don't have insurance. Now, and this is a person from the States who's paid like all the things that one would say. And that's ridiculous because you could make the argument that now this poor person is going to go through whatever rejection and this and that and going to need another heart. Where could that heart have gone? Otherwise, like, why is the system so broken? And so we doctors have now said, that's it. We have to get involved in politics. Part of the reason why politics are the way that they are today is because if you look at the way that it's set up, lawyers from school are taught that, hey, part of your profession may be that you might become a judge, you might become somebody in politics. They understand. They give money to the political institution and they actually work it into what they're doing. Doctors don't do any of that. All doctors do at this point are write white papers, which are papers that tell you what to do and give you the guidelines, but they don't even know how to communicate that science to the masses, which is one of the reasons that we are in the position we are in today. And doctors are the ones who have finally recognized that and have made a change. So I myself, about 5 years ago, started an organization called Healthcare for Action. Healthcare for Action is an organization that is focused on getting healthcare workers into political office. Not because we have an agenda. It's not like, oh, you need to do this or you need to do that. For example, right now, RFK is talking about the food dyes. That's great. Food dyes suck, and we should be getting some of these things out of our food. This is something that has been discussed. Everybody agrees on that, Democrats and Republicans. On the other hand, don't talk to me about food dyes when an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old child got shot and killed praying at a pew in Minneapolis. I'm not debating that people kill people. It's not the guns that automatically kill people, but having mentally ill people having access to guns is not acceptable. So the government needs to figure out, how do we keep guns out of the hands of mentally ill people? And are there certain guns that we should not have around? Because obviously, I mean, I think in the case of this guy, there was a rifle that he used to do, does a 20-year-old need a rifle? Like, what is going on here? Unless it's for hunting. So, we need to stop having conversations that are at a high level and need to just be like, listen, some people are idiots and some people should not have guns. End of story. Some people need to be told, like, this needs to happen for you for your own health. At the same token, though, we can't infringe on our rights, because in the United States we have a constitutional right to freedom, and we have to be able to think about that. So what that means is, though, you need people sitting down at the table, having these conversations, real talk, not on a high level point. I mean, even in Congress and the Senate and stuff, at the end of the day, can these people really represent us when every 2 years they have to go through an election, and they know that they have to pander to the public, and they know that there's no term limits? So basically, 50% of their time they're maybe going to Congress, but the other 50% of the time they're fundraising, because they have to pay money into their situation in order to send out mailers and flyers. So, like, do we really have a body of government that is working for us? Not right now. And so I think doctors have to get involved, because doctors are unique. And I'll give you one last reason why. The reason that healthcare workers are unique is how you started this conversation: the teams. If you are sick lying in the ICU and I turn up to see you and I want to do a surgery on you, but the other doctor says, no, 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 he's too sick, no surgery today. We don't just stand there screaming over your body until you die. We walk out of your room, we sit down, and we say, all right, man, I agree with you that he's really sick, but this is the risk that the family's willing to take. Why don't we do this? Why don't you keep him on the ventilator for 2 more days? We'll get him stabilized, but then I'm going to do my surgery on Wednesday. What do you think? I get 60% of what I want. He gets 40% of what he wants. She gets 20% of what she wants. But you, 100%, get the benefit, because we all work together to make sure that you are getting the best of the best at that time. And you, in this analogy, are America. So doctors already know from a very young age how to do that sort of thing. You may be completely opposite of my views on abortion. I may be like, oh, I'm all for it, and you may be totally against it. But if we are sitting on a committee together talking about whether we should build a road in Alabama, we should be able to have that conversation. And I can do that. Doctors can do that. We can put aside, because we're taught to do that. And so that is why putting healthcare workers in office is not because they're smarter. It's not because they can communicate better. It's because they can work in teams better. And right now, this ineffectual Congress, Senate, the way the administration is working, is not working for the American public, whether you're MAGA, whether you're a hardcore leftist, or whether you're in the middle. It's just not working for us. Our country's losing out economically, losing out scientifically, and those are the two things only that matter in terms of being on the world stage. And if we lose out to China or to another country, that sucks, because we don't need to. We're at our peak. And so we need to get the right people into these positions, including healthcare workers, so that the right decisions can be made without any political agenda or social construct, but just with science and merit.
I really appreciate everything that you're saying, and it's so true because on a number of things, I know that, typically conservatives, Republicans, they talk about pro-life, and liberals and Democrats talk about pro-choice, but it's not so much about, well, of course, it's one of the key reasons, or the crux of the pro-life versus pro-choice argument. Of course, you want a very healthy pregnancy. Of course, under the very best of circumstances, that baby is born within 9 months. And God forbid that there is any, rape or incest, the exceptions that you hear about, or fetal viability. There are abortions that need to happen so a mother's life is not threatened. And if a baby can't survive outside a womb and the baby can't stay inside a mother's body, obviously there has to be a removal process that is still sensitive to religious organizations, or sensitive to the public, to know that this woman needs, her reproductive health care. She needs a certain procedure done if the baby can't survive outside the womb, and that if the mother doesn't have a legalized abortion, her life could be at risk. And my wife's father is the first one to say that when it comes to saving a baby's life or a mother's life, to his point, you save the mother's life because she could, you know, produce future children. If the mother's life is at risk, if the baby can't survive, you have to then think about the survival of the mother. Of course, you want the baby to survive, but not at the detriment of the mother's life too, because that's a life in itself. So the pro-life argument, I feel like it stops short because it's not just about whether a woman can give birth or not. I know that they have differences of opinion about is in vitro fertilization in line with, the church or the Catholic Church. And I know a lot of Catholics who, believe in IVF because they can't naturally have children, although the church or even the Vatican's position, the Pope's position is that IVF should be last resort or not even considered at all. I do think that, and I do believe you are exactly right that medical professionals should get involved in politics because it is about the moral obligations and having the morality of what we're discussing because doctors have that high moral compass and educating them, in your opinion, healthcare for action, understanding not necessarily having a political gender, although I guess it comes with the territory, but understanding how government works and how, Congress legislates and, coming up with solutions. And again, yeah, with the term limits every 2 years, midterms, and then have the 4-year elections. Yeah, there's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of changeover, even under the best of circumstances. If a president is in office for 8 years opposed to 4 years, that could be an issue. But I know I'm giving my political opinions, but I think the world would have been much better off with Joe Biden as an 8-year president opposed to a 4-year. And we saw the failures of the first Trump administration, and we see them now. I mean, you mentioned RFK Jr., and yes, the food dyes conversation. That's a notable one that a lot of medical professionals talk about. But he is also somebody who is on record who has been a conspiracy theorist when it comes to vaccines. I mean, we've seen measles outbreaks in Texas and Florida, and we thought measles were eradicated. I think the last measles case was back in 2015, and then all of a sudden we're seeing them 10 years later. But really, I think measles was early 2000s, if I'm getting the timeline correct of when there was a cure for measles. And then we think about the pandemic and how 1.4 million Americans died. A lot of them, not necessarily their political affiliation, a lot of them couldn't control the deaths. It was happening to healthy, people with vitality and who had, strong health profiles or no underlying conditions that we were aware of. But then we realize that people are dying at a faster pace because they have the comorbidities. But from a political perspective, there are a lot of people who were supporters of Donald Trump who he wasn't demonstrative or he wasn't outspoken about. Although his administration gets credited for Operation Warp Speed, it was the medical professionals under Trump who were really leading that charge. He contradicted what Operation Warp Speed was about because it wasn't until the Biden administration where President Biden was very adamant about getting shots in people's arms, where President Trump is on record saying that, oh, COVID, it's going to go away. It's not a serious issue. And we all know how that turned out. And Dr. Deborah Birx, according to her in an interview, she blames Trump and the administration, really specifically Trump, after the first 100,000 deaths. And Dr. Fauci also has his opinions about what we could have done better as well. And when you see that the medical professionals in the first Trump administration were at odds with what our commander in chief at the time and now current commander in chief, if you can even call him a commander in chief, because there are things that he's doing that don't, warrant that title because a commander in chief should be the ultimate relationship builder. He should be the chief relationship building officer, and he's not. And when you think about now, just yesterday, people leaving the CDC because they're at odds with RFK Jr.'s leadership, just from your perspective, whether it's the pandemic or whether we're seeing just change in policy from the Biden administration to the Trump administration. And yes, to be fair, it's not about Democrats and Republicans. It's not about conservatives and liberals, but Democrats have always been presiding over administrations with stronger economies. Democrats have always professed the importance of climate change, always professed the importance of science-based research and having proper funding. And President Biden wanted to create the cancer moonshot, just like we had the space race of the 60s. He talked about having the importance of curing cancer. And not to be speculative, Does our government know about cancers that can be cured that are not in the mainstream, that are not in, the public sphere? Do doctors have access to treatments that the government already knows about? And I don't know the answer to that question because my podcast, I don't want it to be a podcast where the speculation or, unfounded claims or non-evidence based discussions, because we're having a very evidence-based discussion because I'm interviewing you who is in the top sort of profession as a vascular surgeon, who has done many years of research and training and surgeries, and so I wanna make sure that the integrity of this podcast is only what we can prove, but it's important also with expert opinions, we can surmise about, okay, this is what we know today, this is where we're trying to get to, and to be able to solve the issues that we see on Capitol Hill in Congress, it's important that our elected officials really truly live up to their public servant's name. Being called a public servant, you have to be selfless. You can't be a public servant if you're really following an ideology that privately is wrong, but publicly you profess that it's the right course of action. So I know it's a lot there, but because you are somebody who is also adept, not just in the medical field, but just from the conversation we're having, you have a great understanding of how politics work in this country and how it's different than other countries around the world. Mass shootings is sadly an epidemic here in America, but it's not a pandemic like we experienced with COVID. Things happen, whether in Australia or you hear about things that maybe happen in England or other countries, but we truly have a mass shooting problem in this country, and it is mental health based. And although, yes, Second Amendment right to bear arms is important, but mental health funding needs to be there. We need to get the guns out of people's hands who have mental health issues. And I do take a lot of umbrage where Republicans will say guns don't kill people, people kill people, but the guns are the tool. So, to be very fair in this discussion, it's a mental health crisis, it's a guns crisis. There's more guns than people in the United States. And my concern, my fear, and my wife and I, we have a 2.5-year-old who just started preschool for the first time. You're married with children, I believe. So that leads to my last question, your family life, the importance of being a mother, the importance of being a medical professional who not only takes care of her patient, who's an integral part of her family unit. And, these conversations are happening daily. And it's not just, oh, I'm a medical doctor, so my whole life I'm just going to be in the medical bubble. Or I'm a professional athlete, so my whole life I'm just going to be in the professional sports bubble. And then, oh, I'm an elected official my whole life, so I'm just going to be in the political bubble. Our bubbles are not bubbles. They actually are not, these random bubbles that you would think about, like that you see that when people blow bubbles. No, these are real life issues, and we should not be in silos. And so, would love your thoughts on all that.
Well, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I think, as I mentioned earlier with Mass General, when you asked me, what this is such a major institution, billions of dollars poured through it. It's a mega place compared to what it started out in 1811. But how do we maintain why we began and what the point of us, is? And the way that we do that is we keep the patient centric. Similarly, why did we in the 1700s develop a body of governance? Why did we move from Europe to here and say we're going to start a new country? What was the reason? Because we wanted to govern ourselves. We wanted to take care of what we thought was important, and the way that it was done is through conversation. I'm actually really interested. I mean, our founding fathers, incredible people, all of them. Absolutely phenomenal what they did at the ages that they were at. And I have such deep respect for them. I was just actually at Andrew Jackson's homestead, taking a look at, how he developed and as a president, what he did. And, if you go back to back then, even everything was about keeping the nation in the center and kind of building everything around the nation and what's good for the nation. And what has happened now, to your point about echo chambers and people sort of following ideology and dogma, and again, I'm not being specific about a side because both are wrong to do that. The majority of America is not MAGA and not leftist. The majority of us are centrists. We have, myself included, we have some thoughts that come from the Republican side, some thoughts that come from the Democrat side, and really it's common sense. You just want common sense. I call myself a Bill Maher Democrat because that's really where my ideology sits. And even there, I don't agree with everything he says, but his way of thinking and the things that he says about, the way that we're behaving currently, I'm very much aligned with. And I think we just need to get more people in Congress who talk to each other to be able to move things forward. When I started Healthcare for Action, actually, I was lucky enough to have a conversation with a surgeon general who was one of the Republican surgeon generals. I won't name them who it was because it was a private conversation, but I did have a conversation with him. Really smart person. And, he was saying to me, like, the way that it used to be was that people would come to Congress, they would fly in from their different states, they would have the conversation, on the congressional floor. But then they wouldn't just fly home. That weekend, they would go to each other's houses for a barbecue. Kids are playing, they're talking to each other, and that is where the business of the country actually got done. Because it is a lot easier to chastise and minimize and make people two-dimensional when you don't know them. But when they're your friends, you understand where they're coming. You can really have that conversation over a beer. And that has gone. In fact, it's gone away so much that nowadays, what he was telling me, when you go to Congress, if you're on the Democrat side or Republican side, there's actually like different doors and people don't go to each other's doors. I mean, can you imagine how ridiculous that is? Like, it's just, it's unbecoming of the nation that we are. And I think we really need to say, look, enough. We're not going to do this sort of political grandstanding. We need to go back to having real conversations about real issues that are affecting real Americans. So, even Marjorie Greene Taylor, who has broken with the Republicans and is saying things that are not, this is not political, so I won't tell you what side, but, we need people who are going to say, this is what I think is right. This is what's good for my constituents. Let's have a conversation about it and let's compromise to move the country forward. And that's again why I think healthcare professionals, and it might be I'm obviously biased because I'm part of this community. So that's why I think that these healthcare professionals need to be in politics because the fact of the matter is that if your sister could not have gotten into a safe car and gotten into the hospital and gotten taken care of, no matter the surgeries at the end, if she couldn't have done all these other things, her health would have been, if the access wasn't there, would have been destitute. So my job as a doctor is to ensure that the roads are there, the economy is there, people can get what they need. Otherwise, I'm not doing my full job. I'm just doing my siloed portion of it. And I told you in the beginning of this conversation that someday I will die, of course, as everybody does. And I want to feel like my life had worth and I really was able to take care of my patients. And you cannot ignore the political landscape in 2025 and not be a part of the conversation if you really want to take care of patients, in my opinion.
No, I really appreciate everything you're saying. And, going back to my sister, that she actually had a scheduled appointment. It was on a Tuesday, and she had to see her cardiologist at Cornell University's Cornell Weill, where she had her surgery done. And if she didn't have that scheduled appointment, who knows if she would have thought, okay, maybe I'll just schedule the appointment later in the week. I'll see if I have persistent, symptoms for another day or two. No, it was because she already had a scheduled routine appointment and divine intervention, whatever you like to call it. I mean, the timeline had to be exact where once she got strep and once she was already experiencing fatigue and she had a fever and she did not feel well. And thankfully, a friend was able to drive her, a good friend of hers was able to drive her to the hospital. She didn't have to worry about public transportation. She lives on Long Island, so she didn't have to take a subway or an Uber or a train into the city. She had a friend drive her into the city. But if all of those factors didn't play a part in her getting to the hospital. So just because you had framed it that way, I mean, I that totally resonates. And but everything else you said, I mean, my thoughts and prayers are for the people in Minneapolis and for all the trauma that these communities across the country go to. It really hits close to home. I'm praying for the families who lost children yesterday. I'm praying for the families and the actual injured children and the adults who were injured and having to be, taken care of. But to lose an 8 and 10-year-old who are praying in the pews and they're praying to God, and then that's the way their life ends. I mean, they're definitely angels in heaven. And
Mm.
if you believe in God, and if you believe at least in a higher power, higher being, we're all people. So it doesn't matter how strong your faith is. It doesn't matter what religious doctrine you subscribe to. It really boils down to, where's the humanity? Where is the call for action? Or in your case, you created this organization, Healthcare for Action, because having doctors and surgeons, just medical professionals in general, taking an active role in politics, I think that's definitely a healthy thing. Final two questions. Why is 46 your lucky number? I would love to hear why. And tell me just a little bit more about your family and how much they mean to you and all the success that you've accomplished.
So 46 is my lucky number because that was the number assigned to me when I was a running back and defensive back. So it was the number that my jersey had. I still have both my jerseys. My blue was my home and the white was away. But our colors were blue and white, which are the same colors of that Mass General. So that was kind of cool. And so that's the reason for that number. And so even in my email address and stuff, that's the number always. And then in terms of the family, so I have a wonderful family. At the end of the day, the reason that I'm able to accomplish the things that I'm able to accomplish is because I have a phenomenal husband. So my husband actually ran a data analytics company that he sold, and now he's a managing director there. And he's just like he's very different from me, very different person from me, but like a very like even keeled, kind, incredibly smart, and in different realms where I'm actually not good at all. And so we really complement each other. He's always got a different perspective, but incredibly supportive. So supportive, means, in a marriage, obviously things are 50-50, but they're not 50-50 every day. Sometimes he has to do 100% of the stuff, and sometimes I do 100% of the stuff. We have no roles in the sense that, like, I am happy to cook for him as long as I then have to drive him to the hospital after that because I'm such a terrible cook. And he's happy to help me with the stuff with the kids, and it may sound so ridiculous. Like, in this day and age, there's all this like rah rah, you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. I don't believe in that at all. I think we're a family unit. It's a team, and you are trying to get through. It's the most important team of your life, and you're trying to ensure that the outcome is the best, which is that our kids do as well as they can. And in order for that to happen, the house has to be happy, healthy, and taken care of. People need to get access to what they need, and they need to feel love, most importantly. And so we have set up a home that I think has done all of these things, and the reason for that really is because he's the crux of the relationship. So I am, and we've been married actually next year will be 10 years. So it's not new, so we're not in the honeymoon phase at all. And we do have a third party in our relationship, which is of course our phone, but we try to throw him out as much as we can. But both of us are busy professionals, but we really have a great situation. And as far as I can tell, my kids are doing okay.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm so glad you have a happy, healthy marriage and, a strong family union. My wife and I will be celebrating 5 years. We love going to California, so we're going to be going for my cousin's wedding, and then we're going to explore Newport Beach and Catalina Island, places that Catalina Island we have never been before. I've been to Newport Beach before. She went once with me before, but we want to explore more of it. And I always love going to LA. And the fact of the matter is that anytime you get to enjoy a wedding, especially a wedding in your family, I mean, that brings extra joy and happiness. But, we're very blessed to have our 2.5-year-old son. And, as I mentioned to you earlier, having another child on the way. So we're just praying and hoping for a happy, healthy pregnancy like our first one. And I know that you're very prideful of all of the peer reviewed work that you've edited and books that you've contributed to as well. And that I know that you are doing phenomenal, wonderful work, and that people rely on you so much. And you have made an extraordinary difference in so many people's lives, saving people's lives. And I can just tell by having this conversation with you today how much joy and that your profession brings you. And then to be a part of Harvard Medical School, to be a part of Massachusetts General Hospital, and all of your medical training and knowledge that you've accumulated over the course of decades. It really just speaks to how much you care, and relationship building in a team environment is what everybody should experience in the very short time we have on this earth. And that, the quality of our relationships and the strength of them, the trust, the core beings of who we are, it's all rooted in relationships. And I just want to thank you again for your time, for being my 85th guest on the Wave Capital's guest speaker series on relationship building in a team environment. Any final thoughts before we depart from interview?
Wow. The biggest thought is don't lose hope, with all the barrage of negative stuff that we all get every day. I think at the end of the day, when you talk to people, especially Americans, I love this country and I love our people. And like Americans are really special. I've been all over the world and we are really, really just special people. And I think that we will do ultimately what is best for the nation, all of us together. And I really believe that. And I am lucky because I really get to spend time one on one. Every day I'm in clinic, every day I'm in the operating room, and these are people from all different walks of life, and they never fail to show me how phenomenal they are. So I think that we are on a good trajectory and we're gonna be fine.
Thank you. Thank you for the positive words of wisdom, Dr. Dua. Really appreciate your time. We've had a lengthy discussion. Can't wait for this episode to air. And I look forward to having many more conversations with you in the future. Thank you again for spending your time today with me discussing relationship building and team environment. God bless you and your family. And I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you as well. Take care.